In this part 8 of my series about having fun with field recording and sound design, you learned things like turning the recording I made in a cable car
So I start recording.
into this. And you learn to really understand some first functions of the free application PaulXStretch. You can download this great tool for free. The link is down in the description. The parameter stretch amount is more or less self-explanatory. It simply sets the factor by which the loaded sound file is time stretched. The parameter FFT size is not that easy to understand. The letters FFT stand for fast Fourier transform, and I'm not at all going to explain that. I'm not going to explain what fast Fourier transform is, that it's a matter for mathematics nerds. And even if I am such a nerd loving mathematics very much, this video is not the place for that. To make practical use of the FFT size parameter, you need to know only the following. The software consecutively cuts chunks off from the loaded sound file, not really cutting off, but let's say that. Chunks that are handled as a unit then, and this is important. Each chunk is handled as a unit. Neither we nor the software can manipulate what is in these chunks, but can handle only the whole chunk, a little bit like, let's say, like a black box which is transparent, which we can look into but not reach into. The size of these chunks is set by the FFT size parameter. But what practical consequences does this have? Let me use an analogy to explain this principle. Imagine our loaded sound file were a palette of colors. The smaller the chunks are, the more precise the software can detect where in the sound file something happens, in my analogy, where one color changes into the other. But because of its small size, the chunk doesn't deliver a lot of information about the two involved colors, and about some of the other colors it doesn't know even anything. With large chunks, on the other hand, it is vice versa. The chunk delivers a lot of information about the colors it contains, but no information where or when which color changes to which other color. And we get all colors more or less at the same time, or at least with extremely blurred transitions. Don't forget, PaulXStretch handles a chunk always only as a unit, sees only the sum of its content, not the precise internal structure. Let me approach sound design practice a bit more and explain it all once again, but this time talking about loaded sound. With extremely short FFT sizes, we get mainly crackles, each of which giving report of a sonic event reported at the correct moment in the sound file without but being able to report which event this is. The frequency of the partials of the sound's spectrum at this time are not correctly represented by the chunk, and even less are there changes from one timbre to another. With rather large FFT sizes, we get report of all frequencies of all partials that are and that were in the spectrum during the lifetime of this large chunk, but without a precise report about when the spectral changes, the timbre changes happens. We get blurred sounds, sometimes like ambient scapes, and sometimes simply chaos. Let's get really practical now. I've prepared 3 loops, 3 example samples to demonstrate what's the meaning of all of this. And let me start with an acid loop, and it is exactly 5 seconds long. So I drag it into PaulXStretch. Let me take the headphones so that I can hear it myself, and I start it. All right, I have to adjust the stretch amount here and the FFT size to get my 5 seconds. So you see it's longer here than the original 5 seconds. So I go to 0.8, and the stretch amount, the FFT size can stay as it is right now. So you see here 4.9982, that's okay. All right. Here, just look at the upper corner. There you see the FFT size. You don't know the meaning of the numbers here, but you know the meaning of these numbers. Output length, it's a length in seconds. Okay, reducing the FFT size to, for example, 0.3 or 0.32. Then we have more events which we can listen to, but the timbres are, let's say, rather alien. It's exactly what I have told you before. I have to work with this. That's better. That's better. I get the most similar sound at FFT length of 0.74. Let me repeat it. 0.74. This is the most similar version of the reproduction by PaulXStretch. Most similar on behalf of the number of events and the time when they happen, as well as most similar on behalf of the timbre, the frequency, the spectrum. Let me adjust the time stretch factor to 1. So, what's the original speed? And but to get the exact the original speed, I have to take care that PaulXStretch represents all the sonic events in the sound file exactly, which happens only at very small FFT sizes. And so let me go down. Now we are at the original speed, and we get really all events which are in the original sound file, but they sound quite differently from the original, of course. Let me now increase the FFT size. Let's go to 100%, FFT size 1. And well, now we hear the timbres, all the spectrums of the original, but at completely wrong times. And what's more, the overall time of the replay is about twice as long as the original, more than 10 seconds here. The stretch amount sets the speed which the chunk generating mechanism walks here through the original sound file, but the FFT size sets the length of each of these chunks, and which each chunk lasting longer than natural, then the equivalent part of the original sound, the whole replaying process, lasts longer than the file really is, even at a time stretch factor of 1. When we now increase the time stretch factor, let me do so, let's say to around 40 at first, then even to maximum, The chunk generating mechanism walks very slowly through the sound file now, but we don't really hear a difference to the time stretch factor of 1, which we had before. And this is because even before we got all the sonic contents of the sound file, and that even in a blurred way before we increased the time stretch factor, and this is because we had this extreme value of the FFT size, this extreme value of 1. So we got everything in the sound file, but in a very blurred way, and this is exactly what we get when we increase the time stretch factor. Let me go back to a time stretch factor of 1 now and decrease the FFT size to let's say 17, 18. And then we get our bubbles, of course. And now I increase the time stretch factor again. Let's say to 20, 27, something. And then even to more. And what we hear now is an increased amount of the bubbles. And this is, it looks like, or it sounds like, as if each bubble, each sonic event were continuously repeated and repeated and repeated. But this is not, that is not true. That's not the case. What is happening is we have to know that, at first, that consecutive chunks overlap in time. And these overlapping of consecutive chunks, walking slowly, very slowly now through the sound file, causes the impression of repetition, of repeating one and the same sonic event more and more and more often. Let me reduce the stretch amount a little bit. Or let me just for reasons of demonstration, change the loop. Factor 1. Factor 70. All right. Let me set it to the whole file and let me load the next example. It's a piano loop. So I load this loop into PaulXStretch, start with our well-known starting adjustments here. Now I reduce the FFT size to, well, let's say 0.4, for example. And now we get a quite true report, or a quite true representation of the succession of sonic events in the original file, in the original sound file. And when I increase the FFT size to 1, I get a quite true representation of the whole spectrum, of all timbres, the whole spectra, plural, in the whole sound file, but not at the right places. It sounds a little bit random-like. It is not random, but it sounds a little bit like that. Going back to 0.4 here now, 0.4, and increasing the time stretch factor to, let's say, 6. So nicely demonstrates how overlapping consecutive chunks generate the effect of the transition from one note to the next one being repeated. We have the impression that this transition happens more often than only once. Instead of bong, 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 note after note. When the software is playing a particularly nice part, I can stop the playhead from moving and freeze the sound using this freeze button here. And now it stops at this place. With large FFT sizes, it seems that the freeze button doesn't work anymore. Let me demonstrate this. Oh, but let me go back to 1 here with the stretch amount. Now I freeze. And nothing seems to happen. Freezing or not freezing, the sound, what we get seems to be the same, and is the same indeed. But it happens something. Something is happening. The freeze button simply stops the playhead, meaning it prevents the chunks from being taken from consecutive parts of the sound file, but the software will always continue playing what is in the chunk, and if the chunk contains more or less, or even completely, the whole sound file, we get the whole sound file, freezed or not freezed. Yeah, I think, yeah, that's it to explain why. It's enough to explain why with huge FFT sizes the freeze button sometimes, mostly, seems to be not working. The pre-buffer settings. Some words about the pre-buffer settings now. They are most important, well, mainly when we use this software as a VST, which is also available, when we process live sounds going through PaulXStretch. I'm not going to demonstrate this. I'm not going to demonstrate this software as a VST because it's a little bit outside the range of the topics of this series. But I may well do an intensive and detailed video about the VST version of PaulXStretch in my other channel, Rofil Media 2. Anyway, but even here, the standalone version, the pre-buffer is not completely without meaning, not at all. It sets, let's say, kind of basic length of the FFT sizes, the basic dimension of these chunks. With different pre-buffer adjustments, we get different amounts of content with this one and the same FFT size. Let me demonstrate this. I go stretch amount 0.6. All right, and yes, FFT size 0.74. All right, now I use different pre-buffer sizes. Now I'm at medium. Let me go to small. Let me go to huge. Let me go back to medium and freeze. And let me set 0.3. No, it's too much. 0.5. Yeah, that's good. And now I increase the buffer size, the pre-buffer size, from medium to huge. Everything seems to go more slowly. And now let's try with unfreezing, going back to medium. and 0.34 FFT size. Please listen to the number of, you don't have to count them, to the number of bubbles what we hear. And now I increase the pre-buffer size. It seems that we get different numbers of reproduction with high pre-buffer sizes. Well, of course, we have larger regions of overlapping grains. Okay, you've got it. I think the content of the pre-buffer is always completely played back, and well, then sometimes even, let me demonstrate this. Yes, it's huge. It needs a remarkable time to react to changes. Let me demonstrate this. And now the changes start coming into effect. Readjusting. Nothing happens, nothing happens, nothing happens. At first, the whole content of the pre-buffer, now the changes come into effect, the whole content of the pre-buffer has to be played back before changes come into effect. All right, a third example now. It's a kind of glass harp loop. Here we are, adjusting the stretch amount to somewhat above 1, let's say to 4, and the FFT size to 1 is already enough to get some really, really nice and very useful soundscape. Just lean back and enjoy. Thank you for watching. No, don't forget liking, subscribing, switching on the bell, and visiting my website. Ciao.